All right, welcome back, everyone. Hope you're doing well. So, we are continuing on our journey into consequentialist moral theories. Just to recap, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? We just looked at psychological egoism, which is not a moral theory, but it is a descriptive claim that's directly tied with ethical egoism, which is a moral claim. Hide some of this unnecessary stuff here, shall we? So hopefully you just watched the video on psychological egoism. Hopefully at least you can see how a psychological egoist would answer most of the rebuttals. Rebuttals like people do things against their best interests or people do things for others and not for themselves. We can see how that's still consistent with a person's value set, right? They either have a very selfish or very selfish in regards to others sort of instinct, right? I'm sure you all know people who are very superficially, classically selfish, and people who want the best for themselves, but they also think that the way to reach that is by being deeply connected with their community and other people in it, and their highest quality of life is directly tied with the quality of life of the people they care about, and as far as that extends, right? And may we all strive for such a position of selfishness or self-interest. So, you have the underpinning of human nature. This is the way humans act. They do what they do because they believe in the moments in their best interests or self-interest. Ethical egoism is the moral theory. This is our first consequentialist moral theory. It says we judge the morality of something based on the outcome to the individual actor. So next we're going to look at utilitarianism, which says we judge the morality of something based on the outcome to everybody affected by that action. We're not there yet. That's coming. This one is a consequentialist moral theory that says right or wrong is literally determined by whether something is in an individual's self-interest and if it's not in their self-interest. And that's it. Very interesting. Let it sink in. It literally says that anywhere in the world, something is moral if it's actually in an individual's self-interest. Now let's try it out, right? Generally, we think that telling the truth and keeping your promises and being a good person is good, right? Well, why is it good? This is a moral theory which is supposed to give an explanatory power to your moral intuitions. Well, usually those are good because they're actually in your best interest, in your self-interest in the long run, right? It's better to be a person who's trustworthy, whose word is valid, who can, do what they say regardless of the changing circumstances, right? And it's moral because it's in our best interest. We generally believe that it's good to stay in shape and pay your bills. Why are those things good and moral? This says they're moral and good because they're actually in your self-interest. It actually helps you in the moment and in the long run to pay your bills, to stay healthy, to exercise, to eat well, right? It has a lot of explanatory power. Why do you think your friendships are good, right? The theory says they're good if they're actually in your best in your self-interest, right? Some of your friendships aren't actually in your self-interest. And this says, well, those are not good friendships, right? Those are, it fails the standard. And this is an interesting, I really want people to take this on for a moment. This idea that the only way we have of judging something is based on the outcome towards ourselves, right? And that here you actually have your moral code built around your happiness and lasting joy, right? What do you want for yourself in life? Hopefully you all still want the highest quality of life, for you and the people you care about, right? You want to flourish. Now, what flourishing looks like is different for everybody, right? Happiness is different for everybody. What would make me happy would not make all of you happy. I'm an adrenaline junkie. I need constant banging and hitting and and for many people, even people close to me, they want lots of tranquility and calm and peace, right? So happiness looks different, self-interest. But when we look at people around the world, doesn't it seem like each of them has a right to pursue what is best for them? Call me crazy. Everybody, old, young, male, female, brown, white, black, brown, religious people, non-religious people, politicians, car salesmen, all of them. They have a right to pursue their self-interest. So, why do we bristle so much at the idea that what's moral is what's in your self-interest, right? I mean, isn't that why everyone's going to college? Because they hope it's going to give them a position that's going to be able to better provide for them and increase their quality and well-being of life. Or you just love a good ethics class, in which case I totally feel you on that. So hang with me if this is a little confusing. I'll give you time to practice it. We'll apply these theories and see what we think. So here we go. First of all, how does psychological egoism and ethical egoism relate to each other? I've kind of already laid this out, but normally in class I would give us a minute or two. After you've paused and thought about it, you'll see that psychological egoism is the underpinning that seems pretty well attached to the way humans in fact operate, for better or worse. It's just kind of a factual descriptive claim. And ethical egoism is the normative claim, the moral theory, which tries to it's like, what do we want from a moral theory? Well, we want it to be something that relates to the way humans in fact act in the world, right? And so ethical egoism is kind of an attempt to harmonize our own innate, inevitable tendencies towards doing what we think is in our best interest, our self-interest, with a moral theory that supports it, that is consistent across countries, right? You should still pursue what's in your best interest or self-interest in another country. And I guess we're going to get to the critique. I'll let you critique in a little bit. But another of the criticisms that comes up is, all right, Mr. Doak, let's say we take ethical egoism at face value and say, all right, what's moral is what's actually in my self-interest. How do I actually know what's in my self-interest? You kind of don't know until the end of the story, right? Like, for instance, should you get married to this person, this guy, this girl, this other, well, is that in your self-interest? You might think so at the moment, but what if they end up being like a really bad partner, cheating on you, taking half of everything you own, right? It might end up not being in your self-interest, yeah? Or should you take a job or go get, an art history major or a major in journalism as, the industry's dying, right? Is that in your self-interest? I mean, let's take, for instance, to get real here, many of you are pursuing medicine, right? You're trying to get a job in a field that you think is going to be rewarding, either innately or in the long term with income and status and whatever, right? Hopefully, going to school and paying for these classes is actually in your self-interest. But what happens if you come out and you didn't really learn anything and there's not a job in the industry and you owe money suddenly? Well, you can see there's an argument that it wouldn't be, having taken these classes wouldn't really be in your self-interest if you didn't have something that you took out of it that was of benefit. And so there's an argument that says, all right, we might grant that ethical egoism is valid, right? But it's still kind of impossible to know what's in your self-interest. Well, that's an interesting thing, It's an interesting counter argument. Getting sloppy in my own place, I am a face-to-face kind of guy. This is hard. Well, when we look at history, we can generally see a rule of thumb, right? That keeping your promises is generally more advantageous and beneficial than breaking promises, right? Saying faithful more than infidelity. Now, there might be an odd instance in the histories where somebody steals, lies, cheats, and it only benefits them. They get away with it. They never get caught. They don't have a guilty conscience. Like truly Glaucon's man. Glaucon literally made the argument that if you can do the wrong thing and get away with it, you win, right? Now, many of us made the argument in our videos toward a conscience, right? And even if you don't get the perks of something, like your conscience feels better, right? Instead of having a plagued, guilty conscience. Almost nothing's worse than that. So, the idea is even if we don't for sure know what's in our best interests, we have a good rule of thumb when we look around us. Especially if you find people who are like exemplars of certain virtues that you admire, like consistency, punctuality, charisma, just discipline. Like you should surround yourself with examples that you can draw upon and model yourself after. Um, so, number two. Number three, compare and contrast ethical egoism with ethical subjectivism, our first moral relativist theory. And I think this is, again, I wish we were in class, but it's worth distinguishing between the two. And on the next slide, I'll give you some examples, I believe, how do, geez, load these. Here we go. So, again, one of the big goals here is not to sell you on any of these moral theories or sell you on all of them, but to get you practicing applying the theory to certain situations. So remember, moral theory, descriptive claim, moral judgment. So how would an ethical subjectivist evaluate the situations? Cultural relativist, ethical egoist. Did I really repeat that? I am struggling. So, the trolley car situation. Let's assume that you're in this situation and you decide to say, let's just take you're on the side of the road and you turn the lever. You save the 5, kill the 1. You feel like you did the right thing in the moment, but regret it for the rest of her life. How would an ethical subjectivist evaluate this? Well, they felt like they did the right thing at the time, right? As you recall, that's the subjectivist. If doing what you feel is right is all that makes something right or wrong. So as long as in the moment you feel good about it, but she regrets it for the rest of her life, right? So if you were an ethical egoist, which says that what's moral is what's actually in the individual's self-interest, it would not be the right thing to do to turn the trolley because she regretted it forever, right? And no one wants to live with their regrets, so it's not actually in their self-interest. What would a cultural relativist say? Well, illegally killing the person, laws equal morals for cultural relativists, right? And so you see how we can test these out. So let's go to the next one. I'll give you a second to see if you can make sense of it. So a man steals medicine to save his wife. Feels bad when it happens, goes to jail briefly but saves his life, and they live happily ever after. So, what would a subjectivist say in this situation? Well, he feels bad when he does it, which means that, according to ethical subjectivism, he's doing an immoral thing, right? Because feelings are all that make something right or wrong, according to straight ethical subjectivists. Well, what would the cultural relativist say? Well, he's breaking the law, so he's doing an immoral act, right? So it's a no-go. They'd say, can't do it. What would an ethical egoist say? Well, what's moral is what's actually in a person's self-interest. And if he saves his wife, if they live happily ever after, all's well that ends well, right? It's in his self-interest. Hopefully this is making sense. I'm trying to make this shorter than the last video. I know I can be long-winded. Third, a doctor illegally helps a terminally ill patient end their life. He feels no regrets in the moment, but resents the rest of his life he spends in prison. So you can see the subjectivist would say he did the right thing because he didn't regret it in the moment. He knew he was helping someone who was in a lot of pain, something like that. Cultural relativist would say, hey, it's against the law. Doesn't matter what he felt, right? It's against the law. He goes to jail. It's immoral. Ethical egoist, what would the ethical egoist say? Well, he ends up in jail and he resents being there. So it really wasn't a win-win. It wasn't in his self-interest. If he might have been an exemplar type of human being who, doesn't change their mind no matter what, and if they did what they felt was right, would be content to stay the rest of their life in prison, and having that broken like an inner cord or a code of conduct. But that's not the case here. And so he resents it, regrets it. Ethical egoists would say no go. So hopefully that makes sense. And I will be interested to see how much. Well, actually, I'm going to show you a video by Ayn Rand after this to kind of spell out a little bit further. And then next week, I will introduce us to utilitarianism, which is kind of like the next moral philosophy that builds on this, also consequentialist. All right. See you